Okay. Uh, Welcome everybody who may be watching or not to the this one of the meeting of the CSUS Philosophy Club. This week we are going to be having a presentation by our esteemed outreach coordinator, Camille Delizo. Am I pronouncing that right? I haven't pronounced it before.
Right. That was
Okay, cool.
perfect.
It was either Delizo or Delizo, and I wasn't sure. Anyway, on the problem of the ship of Theseus, which deals with consistency of identity and, in other words, metaphysics. With that, we're going to go ahead and, just to clarify, I've done a stupid thing. We've had some discussion of the housekeeping and planning for the club right before the recording, so instead of clogging the airwaves with that. But basically, the conclusion is we may have summer meetings. They will be of a different structure. I don't have a conclusion on that yet. And next time for the club, we are going on May 6th. We should tentatively have a presentation by Kyle Swan, a professor at Sac State. I don't know what he would be presenting on yet, but we will find out. With that, Camille, if you are ready, we can launch straight into the presentation for today.
Yeah, thank you. I actually have a presentation, so could I share my screen?
Of course. Yeah.
Okay. I hope this is the right one I'm sharing. Oh, can you guys see that?
Yes, I can. Anyway.
Okay, finally it works. Okay, so this meeting I'm going to be speaking about the ship of Theseus, and it's usually known as the problem of the ship of Theseus or the ship of Theseus paradox. I just refer to it as a thought experiment. And it's a thought experiment in metaphysics, specifically identity metaphysics. And before I continue, for those who aren't familiar with metaphysics or have a hard time understanding, I honestly don't blame you, because I myself still have a hard time understanding metaphysics or understanding a solid definition of metaphysics, but it's basically the branch of philosophy concerning the fundamental nature of reality and other abstract concepts like time, space, substance, existence, and in this particular case, identity. So identity metaphysics concerns the fundamental nature of identity and what is identity and what makes up identity. And one major question about the nature of identity is that the ship of Theseus brings up is the following, which is, does an object whose parts are all replaced remain the same object? So some of you might be familiar with the picture I have up here. It's from the show WandaVision. And it's the scene, this scene is pretty analogous to the version of the ship of Theseus, to a version of the thought experiment. We have the two characters that are supposed to be the same character, Synthesoid Vision. He's supposed to be dead, except the one on the left is recreated by his soulmate Wanda and has the original memories of the Vision, whereas the other on the right has the original body parts of the Vision. And so these two are discussing who actually is the real Vision. And I'm pretty sure it's because of this scene that this thought experiment has been trending in March. So anyways, I'll go over, this is a rendition of a version of the ship of Theseus I'll cover later. But first we'll start with the original version of the ship of Theseus, which was created by Plutarch in his, I believe he wrote the life of Theseus. So here we have Theseus ship, and this is Theseus ship. We'll just call that ship A at year 0 with fresh wooden planks. And as time goes by, a plank rots and has to be replaced with a new plank. And 1,000 planks years down the road, each plank on Theseus's ship will finally be replaced, and then we now have a ship with new planks. Theseus's ship with the new planks will be called ship B for reference. And so the question is the ship with the new planks still the same ship as the one that we started with? And at this point, a number of people usually already have a quick answer. They say, yes, of course, it still feels like the same ship. It occupies the same space. Some even say Theseus still owns it, etc. So it's still the same ship. And so another about 2,000 years later, another version comes up, and this is it's created by Hobbes in his work De Colore. And so it's definitely made things more complex and interesting. And this is actually the version that the WandaVision example is most similar to. So what if we have each plank from the original ship A, be replaced by a new one, and let's say each is replaced with a metal plank, until all its old planks are replaced with new metal planks, and now we have a metal ship B, and each of the original ship's original wood planks were saved and then used to reassemble a new wooden ship, not really new now that it has the old planks, and we'll call that ship C. I forgot where I read this, but I believe there's a story where the builders of ship C put their ship in the museum, and they call it the ship of Theseus because it's made from the planks of the original ship of Theseus. And then the sailors of ship B come back, and they were outraged and claimed that it was actually their ship that was the actual ship of Theseus. And so this brings a question of like, which of these ships is the actual ship of Theseus? Is it ship B, the ship which used to be ship A, but then its planks were replaced, or is it ship C that has the original planks of the ship of Theseus? And as far as I'm aware, there hasn't been a general consensus on what ship is the real ship of Theseus. There are a number of resolutions, and I've decided to share a couple. So Hobbes himself, he implies that with objects like the ship of Theseus, it remains the same through gradual change. So by that, he means that as each plank from ship A is used for ship E, or ship C, sorry, ship C is starting to become one plank closer to being the ship of Theseus. And it's quite an interesting view because from what I've remembered, Hobbes is a nominalist. So in his view, at each time the ship of Theseus, ship A, loses a plank, it starts to become less like the original ship more, and ship C starts to become the original ship of Theseus. Other people will also use Aristotle's concept of four causes. And to briefly go over what those four causes are, there's material cause, which is what the thing is made of, efficient cause, the source, the final cause, which is the end, the purpose of the thing, and the formal cause, which is the form of something or its essence. And Aristotle perceives the final cause to be the what it is part of an object and by essence. And by this concept of essence, people would hypothesize that ship B is the real ship, as it takes the essence of the original ship that precedes it. And another view that people will also use is for the first scenario, four-dimensionalism, which is another concept in metaphysics. I'm not going to go too far down since the metaphysics of time can be very complicated. But four-dimensionalism basically treats objects as being four-dimensional. So an object exists across three spatial dimensions and one dimension of time. And with this view, it still remains the same object over time despite that object undergoing change. So planks being replaced on the original ship are just three-dimensional time slices by time slices. The way I understand is that those are just pretty much stages of change. And these stages of change are just they still share one common thing, and that is the four-dimensional object that is the ship of Theseus. So ship B in the first scenario would be the real ship of Theseus still. And those are just a few, but there are various resolutions depending on what perspective you are seeing it through. And so why is this important? What has it contributed to philosophy? So it has it's contributed a lot to the discussion of material constitution. It raises questions about objects and their identity, since things undergo change, especially changes of parts when something is broken or worn out. There's actually this interesting case that I heard is talked about in law school. Um, it's often discussed in introductory jurisprudence and evidence classes. And there's this, they asked this question whether a weapon used in a murder, for example, would still be considered the same murder weapon if its handle and its head and blade were replaced multiple times. And so that leads to questions like, what makes something the same thing over time despite the changes it goes through? Is identity merely the sum of a thing's parts? And the Ship of Theseus has also contributed questions about personal identity. So these questions are like when we get older, are we the same person as when we were younger? And that kind of sounds like a dumb question because we do remain the same physically, but some people actually might see it differently. Other questions also include, what if our brain or part of our brain is transported to a different body? Or what if each of our body parts are replaced? Do we still remain the same person? And what constitutes our identity? Is it the sameness of body? Is it our conscience, our soul, our memories? And so that's the contribution that this thought experiment has given to philosophy. It's a real puzzle on what it really makes you think about what really makes up our identity. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Camille.
Thank you.
Shall I put the agenda back up on the screen, or should we leave it on one of the slides here? Maybe actually maybe the branching diagram for scenario 2 with ships B and C would be ideal, just so we can better easily keep track of something we're talking about. Okay, awesome. That's just to have up for our reference during the discussion portion. But this at the moment shall be, I decree, the critique portion of our presentation. And as an initial thought, I rather liked it. With the only, I think the only like caveat I can really bring to the table here is that I got the sense at points that the PowerPoint is slightly overcomplicated. I'm looking at the most complicated image on that PowerPoint. It's helpful, but it is also kind of noisy. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know how you could have done it better or differently, but that is something. Like if you have a lot of stuff going on in the PowerPoint, somebody like me who really can't read and listen at the same time may have trouble following you. That could be a point of concern. Other than that, I think you're excellent. I don't know.
No, yeah, I agree. To be honest, I feel like I should have just drawn one out, but I for the sake of time, I just tried to find a really quick picture, and I just kind of wanted to put something on the screen. But I agree. I feel like yeah. But thank you for that feedback.
Do you have any other?
I don't. Oh, sorry. I was going to say that I really liked your presentation. I appreciate that you brought in stuff that, like you mentioned, trending things. I appreciate that you brought in stuff that's, I don't want to say interesting, man, that sounds bad. Like
as opposed
media
to
relevant, because no, this is one of my favorite presentations. Sorry.
Okay.
Man, but I really enjoyed it. I do get the point about this slide specifically being a little busy, but maybe if you were to do this type of presentation again, I'd say you could take the bottom part that just says like the equal sign BC and move it to another slide. So like maybe after that you could be like, which one is the like ... kind of stuff. Like, I don't know, but I really liked your presentation. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll second that. The bringing in stuff from like popular culture makes it seem has the effect, has a dual effect, I think, of making the scenario of the ship of Theseus more approachable, less like stuffy philosophy, and demonstrates that this is a thing that could possibly happen, that at least has happened in hypothetical scenarios that have just sort of come up, naturally, as opposed to the sort of contrived nature I think thought experiments often are seen as having. The example of Vision, and I'm not actually familiar with that film, but it's a compelling example of exactly the kind of problem we could theoretically be facing in the actual future with technology advancing how it is. So yeah.
I also liked it, and I liked the WandaVision part because I'm like, oh, okay, so someone's gonna mention WandaVision, right? Maybe we'll mention WandaVision, and then no, you had that covered from the get go. I'm like, oh, sweet. I think I know what we're doing over the summer, y'all. We're gonna watch WandaVision.
Okay. I can neither confirm nor deny that the Velocity Club will be hosting a WandaVision watch along. But yeah. Okay. Anyway, I think most folks, and us included, will naturally have this issue. I know I do. That during public speaking, one can get kind of nervous, maybe a little bit stuttery and prone to second guessing what one is about to say.
Yeah.
That comes with practice. I'm not levying that as a sincere criticism. Just we'll keep doing
it's
this kind
okay.
of thing.
It's okay. I'm glad you mentioned that because it's been a while since I've done a presentation. So I feel like it's something I have to work on, especially like since I am going to law school, and I do have social anxiety too, but I'm okay. I got it. Thank you.
Yeah, who doesn't have social anxiety? It's the fear of failure, but for humans. Anyway, so yeah, that was that. That was good. We should now, I suppose, be in the discussion portion, unless we have any other critiques of the presentation to offer later. That's fine. But yeah, actually talking about talking through the problem of the ship of Theseus, how we might solve it, and I'm going to make an initial offering here that I think might frame our discussion somewhat. It is usually presumed when we're talking about the metaphysics of identity that a thing has to retain its label over time, right? That it has to retain like a singular identity in the sort of its simple form. Like the ship of Theseus remains the ship of Theseus, or at least it should, and we have to figure out how over time and through changes. But I don't know if that's actually necessary to our metaphysics. Like it is perhaps more workable because it's a more detailed analysis if we have qualifiers attached to these identities, like the ship of Theseus can be thought of as like ceasing to exist, but it won't really matter if now we have a ship of Theseus that is all metal and a ship of Theseus that is constructed from the original planks. Like we would attach those qualifiers to the identities of the things. And it would seem like the ship of Theseus has been sort of functionally destroyed, but that's fine. At least it seems to me. So yeah, I just wanted to make an initial offering that we don't need to take it as granted that identities have to persist over time and through comprehensive changes like this. Although where exactly the identity of the ship of Theseus would have branched like that or been destroyed, depending on your interpretation, is unclear, even in my mind. So no idea. Yeah.
I don't know. I guess that this is sort of a controversial take, but I don't find it all that controversial. I I think that both of them are the ship of Theseus, and I don't really pull the attention. Granted, I think both of them are identical to the ship of Theseus and not identical to each other, obviously. And I suppose that's where the tension's supposed to be. But like, I mean, like you said, it just sort of split. It's like both of these entities can rightfully sort of trace their identity back to the ship of Theseus, and I don't find that to be a problem. Like, I mean, like if I get piece by piece replaced by robot parts, and then, someone also saves all my organic fleshy bits and, reanimates them Frankenstein style, and Daniel have a conversation, they're both me. Fleshy Daniel and robot Daniel are both rightfully me. And I don't know. I don't see a problem with that, like metaphysically. It'd be terrible for the world because, it would just be utter chaos, but metaphysically speaking, I don't find an issue.
Yeah, I always Daniel, I always that's a really interesting take because I have the same thought as well. And then other people in because I'm in metaphysics right now, and so we have weekly discussions. And so there was someone who was asking, well, how do we know who like the real, like say in your case, who would be like the actual Daniel, as in like there has to be something that holds that identity. And so that's why people also bring up the scenario where if your brain were transported to somebody else's body, or if all your body parts were replaced except for your brain, like you would still be the same. So does the identity lie in the conscience, the soul? And so that's yeah, there's always somebody. There was, I for the last, I mean, I believe that occurred twice because I had two discussions about this in my metaphysics class.
There's always someone that wants to argue something in metaphysics. I hated those dang discussion posts last semester because it's just like I'm pulling my hair out trying to find something to say about our third week of time travel, and I just have nothing. I'm just spent. I don't care anymore. But to that person's point about which one's sort of the real Daniel. I mean, like, let's just even really simplify it. Let's say, Dr. Supervillain comes down and hits me with the cloning beam, and out before me is a perfect clone of my exact form right this very second with all of its memories. I don't that clones me and I'm that clone, and I like there's not, practically speaking, a better way to parse it out than to say that the ship of Theseus just splits, that it is identical to two future beings or ships that are not identical with each other.
Yeah. We may have to use a different concept from identity, only because identity in sort of formal logic, in the sort of mathematical universe, is something that does transfer, that you could not logically have A and B both be identical to the original thing, but not to each other. You couldn't have ships B and C both be identical to the original ship, and somehow not be identical to each other if these relationships are identity relationships. Again, that's just a function of how we do formal logic, how we do things like programming and math. So what may be most helpful to like confronting the problem posed by the ship of Theseus is coming up with a new concept to capture this kind of relationship where you have had this like split in it and a thing's constancy of identity. Something is happening. I'm going to check out for a moment. I'll be right back. Talk amongst yourselves.
Daniel, that was a really cool example with the clones thing. I wish you mentioned
Yeah,
that.
I
I mean, like,
appreciate it.
I wish somebody mentioned that in the discussions.
I was going to say, this isn't really the splitting of two different things, but I think it could still kind of fit with the ship B concept. People are, like, research has been done about cells regenerating every like 7 to 10 years. So after like 7 to 10 years, completely new set of cells than you would have had like 7 years ago. And that's frequently told to sexual assault survivors. And like, I just think that maybe fits more in the B category. Like, I know it's not really this splitting, but like, I don't know, I just keep thinking about that, and I'm like, I want to shout that out. Yeah, I think I come at stuff from a very not ship perspective. Yeah, definitely more from what I've like seen / heard of like humans, because I feel like the ship concept for me, well, it makes sense, and I do think I lean towards B being the more true ship, the true like, yeah. But I can still see areas where C would have, like, where it could potentially be C, but I don't know. I feel like it's either B or it's both. I don't think it's just C. Yeah.
Yeah, Gabrielle, I've heard of that. Every 7 years, all the cells are replaced, right? Yeah, I've heard of that, and I also thought that was really interesting, and I agree with you. I also kind of see like there's, I don't know, like I feel like there's like this with humans it's different, I guess, because I mean, as we grow, we still are the same person, just
Yeah.
we're in the same body. It's just that it just changes over time, and for some people they perceive that change as if it's a completely different it's
Like a
a
different
completely
form.
different person. Right.
Yeah. Okay.
But I feel like with humans they endure, and with objects I guess it could be a little different. I don't know, I
Okay,
just feel like
yeah.
there's
That
something
does make
different with
sense. That
objects.
does make sense. I think that's probably has to do with the consciousness, sentient for being kind of thing, rather than a ship, I guess, which would be an object or something. I don't know whether that'd be considered like an object. Yeah, it's an object. Sorry. Yeah. So I think that, like, even if the two ships are like the one which has none of the original parts, but was, I guess, originally the ship. I don't know. Like, I'm trying to think of how to describe this in like a way that isn't just me saying like fragments of sentences, then being like, no, no.
Oh no,
I'm
no,
gonna,
it's all good.
yeah, okay. Man.
Jump off a little bit here, and a sort of potentially less controversial way to parse this out is going with the every 7 years the cells recycle thing. With that, we appear as people to just like just go through a cycle where we wind up as ship B. And so really like that could just simply be how we go about this is like, okay, like we do this, like clearly it should be, and we can essentially view the ship of Theseus as just sort of almost like a proper noun. It's like, the ship that is Theseus, and then this other thing is just like a historical model of what it originally looked at like, with some real authenticity to it. I mean, that's one way to go about it, and you just in the same way that I continue to persevere as Daniel, just year after year, even as the cells in my body recycle, so the ship goes about things. I still like mine better, just simply because I get to talk about like fleshy clones of myself, but that's just vanity.
I think that does make sense. The model versus I guess the essence. I'm not really sure what other word to use besides essence, but yeah. Okay. I think I like that.
Essence is a good word. Essence is a good word.
Okay.
Okay. If I may, I can also, of course I may. I run this show. I can also add, I don't know if we've mentioned it yet, but there's much to do in modern philosophy about, I say modern philosophy, I mean like 16th century and forward, about substance and what we mean by that. substance being in the minds of these philosophers I'm looking at, Leibniz and Spinoza, the thing that doesn't rely on anything else for its existence, right? So like non-consequential. But that's one sort of feature of substance. Substance is also well, it's sort of like semantically non-contingent as well. Identity would be something I think would be tieable to substance in that you could say that because I have like the same, or I don't know, because I retain some like essential and non-conditional features, right? I would have the same identity. Leibniz introduces something interesting here with the idea of the complete concept of the thing. And what's important about the complete concept is that it is sort of you, or the thing, whatever it is. We're talking about identity. The thing, whatever it is, seen four-dimensionally, but also seen deterministically. So from the instant it is the thing it is, to the instant it ceases to exist at all. Whatever sort of changes it endures over time, whatever parts it happens to have at any given moment, are necessary to that something, to that thing, and sort of included in its complete concept, in its identity properly viewed under Leibniz's view. This is how he sort of reconciles like the problem of evil with the his view is about what God would be with the presence of like bad deeds, evil people, and so forth. You have to basically, God didn't do the thing; He created the person, and the person entailed the thing that was bad. So it's like abnegating responsibility. But the important thing, the important feature of complete concepts is it allows you to sort of retain identity over time, because all of the things that happen to you over time were included in the identity in the first place, although we may not have known that. So that's one sort of construct we can work with, complete concepts. I'm not sure how exactly that would handle the ship of Theseus scenario 2 here. But I suppose like you'd say like the complete concept of the original ship of Theseus, it included, although we didn't know it at the time, that it would eventually have its parts replaced by metal parts and have its original parts shipped off somewhere else to be in a museum. Shipped off somewhere. God. Okay. Displayed, reassembled and displayed in a museum somewhere. I appreciate that I've actually struck a chord there. Yeah. So the sort of complete concept is how I most easily handle the problem of the ship of Theseus, even though I'm not entirely sure on the details, I'll be honest. But yeah, this idea of like viewing things in deterministic terms over time as having their complete identities already set at the beginning kind of helps with this problem of how things change, because they don't actually change. They always entailed what they would be. That's philosophy, man.
I mean, if we're gonna bring in just like theories of substance, like I say, we can just use bundle theory and say the ship of Theseus is whichever one we want it to be. It's just however we want to classify our bundles, and then boom, problem solved. Huzzah! I love philosophy. I also love how that made no sense whatsoever to Gabriella, and I could try to explain it. I would just fail, and you'd be more confused.
I have the ability to Google, so.
Yeah, isn't from what it's been a long time since I've learned about it, actually. Bundle theory, isn't that just basically things are just bundles of things? So the ship, it would just be a bundle of planks.
Yep, and the ship of Theseus would be a bundle of planks, or a bundle of planks combined with a particular title, or whatever we bloody well wanted it to be.
I guess the oh, sorry, William, were you gonna say something?
No, I was gonna try to launch right in with a. I'm taking notes over here, guys. Pay attention to me. No. Yeah, the bundle theory. I'm not actually familiar with the bundle theory, but it seems like it's sort of it's an attempt to sort of confront the problem by saying it's more a matter of semantics than metaphysics. It's really just it's a matter of like of assigning the label to the ship of Theseus as it maybe benefits us, as as it seems appropriate for the moment. Is like we can formalize it based on some like some substantive criteria. Substantive, that's not right the word. Some other like non-metaphysical criteria, some I suppose physical criteria. But what it means is like it's sort of the bundle theory, as it's been proposed to me literally in the last 2 minutes, seems to suggest that the metaphysics of identity doesn't really matter very much. We are not obligated to care whether or not the ship of Theseus retains its identity over time. It does if we want it to, if we're willing to assign it the terms. Whatever else.
I am certainly using it to evoke that kind of a reaction. I don't think you necessarily have to go that route if you are a bundle theorist about substance within the realm of metaphysics. I don't think that's a requirement, but like that's the way I go about it. And like bundle theory has its own problems, but this is not a discussion of the assortment of various metaphysical theories that all suck, by the way. Metaphysics was hard because none of it made sense.
I have metaphysics on the docket for next, I think it's next semester, if I remember rightly. Yep. Yeah, first thing in the week, spring 2021, or not fall 2021. I keep mixing that up, and it's really throwing me off trying to get my classes sorted out. not knowing the difference between fall and spring. In fairness to me, I grew up in San Diego, where there is no difference between fall and spring. So yeah.
How do you
yeah.
like that Sacramento spring, by the way? The whopping 3 weeks that it exists. Pretty nice, isn't it? Those 3 weeks, Sacramento's dope as hell.
That pollen, just wonderful.
I've never had to deal with pollen allergies. I feel so bad for people having to do that. I'm allergic to cats, though, which I've had all my life until like just now. So kind of getting a little bit. So yeah, if I may, can we expand a little bit on this bundle theory idea? Because I don't know anything about it. I imagine I'm going to have to. But it seems like it could be sort of a pragmatic way of approaching the problem of the ship of Theseus. And I just don't know anything about it, really. Like
I mean, like it's like that's. I feel like I just sort of repeated myself a little bit. Like that's definitely the way that I'm taking the theory, but like I strongly suspect that other people who adhere to this theory would not think that it is sort of trivial in this sort of regard, because it's just a theory of what constitutes, a given substance, what makes objects what they are in general, and it's one of the assortment of theories. And I just think if you apply it to this particular case, I personally think it does sort of like in a pragmatism make the problem sort of go away, or just let you go with whatever answer you feel is most palatable for that reason, then you're good to go. But I don't think that's necessarily the case for like everyone or every bundle theorist.
Let's see. Yeah, okay. I assume I'll learn more about this at a later time, but if we as a group are not prepared to elaborate on that just now, that's fine. I can slightly move us forward here with the question of how we would handle the ownership of the ship of Theseus. because it seems like that's sort of thing you actually are sort of confronted with in law, particularly because property. But for example, like I don't really know how the law would handle this situation of scenario 2, but we can discuss a little bit how should it handle this situation. It seems like if I replace a part of something I own, I still own that something. It's like its legal substance is retained even through gradual change, but it's not then clear what happens to the parts. Do I own ships B and C if I own the original?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. So I don't know, with Theseus, I guess the question that we would start with is like, does he, I mean, he owns the ship, but if we start replacing the planks one by one, he would still own the ship, but then he would technically be owning its name since the material parts of the ship would be gone. So so then in the end, what is he really owning? Is he owning really just the name or the ship? But it just seems like he would just be owning the name if ship B would be the actual ship of Theseus in scenario 2.
This reminds me a little bit of like when two founding members of a band feud and break up, and so you legally have to have two different versions of the band because they both equally own the copyright.
That's really funny.
Yeah, I mean the question about like property is somewhat okay. I have two things to contribute that I think are totally separate, but we'll find out. I think as I talk, as these ideas come together in real time in my head. So you can approach the ownership question as a sort of with the framing that you don't actually own or care to own every trait in the bundle when you own a thing. There are going to be attributes of it which are fungible, replaceable, and attributes which are not. You could say that like the ship of Theseus, if let's say he's called it the ship of Theseus, I don't know why you would do that. My boat would not be the boat of Leo. The boat of William.
Branding. That's why he would do it. Branding.
Yes. So let's say if he calls it the ship of Theseus, then that name would seem to be a non-fungible trait. Like he can change it out, but it can't like change out from under him without the kind of direction that you would need to modify your property. But the actual like planks of wood, the particular sail that's being used, and so on and so forth, he doesn't really care why which sail that is, as long as the sail has the set of attributes he wants from the sail. Like he owns the name of the ship, he owns its functions, maybe some of its key dimensions. Those you wouldn't want to change. Otherwise, it would seem to be like a wrongful appropriation of his property. But the actual individual planks, like he doesn't seem to care about. There's also the possibility that looking at the ship of Theseus, at the scenario 2 here as a narrative, as a story that's playing out, it's plausible that he either discards or sells all the original planks to whoever now puts it together. And in that scenario, in that case, whoever puts it together would own the new ship, and it might share a name with the ship of Theseus as a museum piece. It would sort of always come with that qual over it. This is not the ship of Theseus. This is the museum piece curated from the parts of the ship of Theseus. But in that case, that whoever curated them, whoever bought them or picked them up later, owns this other ship. But it happened by like a gradual transaction rather than the thing like suddenly becoming a separate entity unto itself. And I suppose that would have as I'm trying to put these ideas together, apparently they are quite separate, that museum piece of the original parts from the ship of Theseus would now have its own sort of its own sets of non-fungible attributes that are sort of functional to its, that are important to the fact that it is property to the person who owns it as property. But it would also have its own set of fungible characteristics, like, I don't know, whether or not it's in the water. So yeah, that's I don't know. There's lots of different sort of analytical approaches to identity. It's fun not so much in the sort of the sort of pragmatic sense, but it is fun as just a logic puzzle. Like, how do you parse out what has happened here?
Yeah, that's interesting because now that you word it like that, like if we weren't looking things in the philosophical, metaphysical way, and I were to just, I don't think anyone would want to like, if I were to give the planks of my ship to somebody, it'd be kind of absurd for them to like build their own ship and then call it the same name as my ship. But yeah, I just think that's funny how in realistically, practically or pragmatically, we wouldn't really be doing that. But yeah, as you said, this is in itself a logic puzzle. So I just wanted to point that out, how interesting like it would be. Like nobody would say like, oh, metaphysically, this is not you, this is actually your ship, because you have all the parts that I just gave you. Like in real life would be like, oh, that's bullshit. Like this, I gave you the parts, but you can't just take the name for what like that,
I still think it makes great sense to do it like bands do. You have one person sailing the sea as the original ship of Theseus, and then you have another person sailing the seven seas as Theseus's ship of Theseus. And then boom, you have everyone confused, but you technically have the problem solved.
Yeah, again,
that's not philosophy.
Again, it's usually taken as important that like stuff does retain identity through changes, that identity persists. But that's really only important for our semantics, for our convenience in how we talk about things. It's not like actually necessarily metaphysically true that stuff retains identity over time. Because this was figured out before even the ancients with that old phrase. I can't remember who said it. It might have been Heraclitus. Said that you can never step in the same river twice, because both the river and you have changed since the last time you stepped in it. So we're just applying names. We can do this on a pragmatic basis, and when we approach that from a self-consistent framework, with the self-consistent analysis of the situation, we don't necessarily have to appeal to something actual, something out there apart from human society and pragmatics. Pragmatics? Like economics. Anyway, I'm butchering the language today. Unless it is, I don't know, in and of itself important to have like this metaphysical stuff figured out, and maybe it isn't arbitrary. Although identity would still not sort of, it wouldn't follow from like metaphysics being a real thing to that identity is a necessary real thing.
I mean, to the sort of like pragmatically the need to figure this out. I like the example you brought up, Cam, about the knife that's replaced, piece by piece. Is it still the same murder weapon? Like, and I want to choose my words carefully. I am not a violent person, but if I ever happen to be in some unfortunate circumstances where I have fallen down a path and commit a murder, I hypothetically, in this situation, would totally replace the hypothetical alleged murder weapon piece by piece so that it's not technically the same weapon. And then I would have my defense attorney read up on this and try to argue in a court of law that they cannot convict me because they do not have the murder weapon, because that is not the murder weapon. I would absolutely use this, again, in this hypothetical situation that will never actually happen.
Just in case this is recorded, so.
Exactly. Yeah, and like we can confront the problem this way too. We can continue to view it like as a story rather than as an identity. If you have a knife that used to be the murder weapon, in every like important sense, you've got the murder weapon. Like if you have that figured out, if you have that is established, then whether or not it sort of metaphysically retains its identity ceases to be important. We know that this was the weapon used to kill a person, allegedly. But yeah, there's also the idea of the fact that if all the parts were replaced and nobody actually knew that this story had played out, except somebody who's not willing to say so, except in a recorded meeting, then we wouldn't be able to prove what the murder weapon had been, like, right? We wouldn't be able to use that as tangible evidence, or at least it doesn't seem so, because we just wouldn't know. Yeah, I assume that in the replacement of parts, you have lost the material like DNA that would identify the victim or something, and that sort of thing. I would mention fingerprints, but I happen to know that's kind of junk science.
We should talk about murder more often in Philosophy Club. I've decided. It makes for great examples. I'm glad that phrase is speaking on the recording. We should talk about murder more.
Exactly. This is very much the use mention distinction. I suppose we're using the concept of murder, so maybe not. Anyway, what even is the concept of murder? Does it retain its murderiness over time and gradual changes or sudden changes, as the case may be?
Okay, we define murder, philosophically speaking, as unjust killing, but then over time, as we learn more and more about the person that in this hypothetical world I murdered or whatever that would never actually happen, as we learn more about them, we learn that they're a terrible person, and so they've changed in our perception over time so that we no longer think that the actions that I hypothetically done are unjustified. Is it still a murder?
That's actually kind of it. We would say, I think, that like it was unjustified at the time, and I don't have the sort of the legal chops to be talking about this, but it would seem like we would still classify it as a murder if we had found out that the victim was like Adolf Hitler, right? That isn't really the what we mean by unjust in this. In the case of murder, we're talking about we're appealing to sort of to a slightly higher order there. I said, well, maybe lower order. I think it's a lower order because there's like morality and then there's law on a sort of I keep saying like lower order. It's elsewhere in the program. But what we mean by like unjust killing is there wasn't like due process, that a person was deprived of life without due process of law. What we mean by killing, though, is slightly more muddy. In the sort of hypothetical science fiction scenarios we can construct with frameworks like the ship of Theseus, with this WandaVision example. Because it seems like you could with a similar sort of scenario undo a murder, but you could bring the person back to life, and therefore it seems like it's no longer a crime, or at least it's no longer like it's a different crime, at least. if you were to if you were to create, if you were to interrupt the transporter beam process from Star Trek, is that what they're called? I mean, I know it's called Star Trek. Are they transporter beams? Probably not. And if you were to interrupt that process and construct reconstruct the original character on the ground, and construct an atom for atom identical clone to that character in the ship of Theseus in this case, would you have in effect destroyed the original person by splitting that person's identity into two different, tangible beings? Would that be a murder, even though you've actually created a life form? I don't know.
You could have someone testifying at their own murder trial without needing a Ouija board. This is fantastic. I knew we should have talked about murder more. Aren't you learning all sorts of lovely things for law school, Cam?
I'm sitting here just hoping that we are actually offering novel and interesting ideas here, rather than like stuff that's already been covered. I've not even made it through philosophy of law, the first class in that sort of coursework yet.
I don't know about you guys, but I just looked up what the transporter beam from Star Trek's called. It's literally just called a transport beam. So I felt that was good enough to look up. right behind the bundle theory.
I should look that up.
Speaking of murder and crime, and this also has to do with a personal identity as well, but I know some people, like when they stand in court for a crime that they committed, like say decades ago, and there will be people who will say like, well, I'm a different set of cells than I was 25 years ago, so there's no way in hell that I totally shot that person and killed them. Like, that's a different set of cells right there. And
Yeah,
so like that kind of just, I don't know, that kind of sounds a bit extreme, but some people have assumed that personal identity lies with, I guess, just material constitution. I don't know. That's so I've read many stories like that, especially in the stuff that I read for metaphysics.
I mean, do these people win? Is that argument successful? Do they get away with murder?
I have no idea.
Man, it's like the how to get away with murder. Just wait 10 years. Don't get caught for 10 years. New set of cells.
Actually, not sure. Just as a descriptive scientific point, whether and how many cells actually do get replaced over.
I believe
years.
Gabriella talked about this.
Yeah, I did when you were doing something. 7 to 10 years, every single cell will be replaced in your body.
Every single one, even
7 to 10, every single one, dude.
Huh.
Look it up.
I should. I always assumed. I assumed from maybe inferred is a better term here, that neurons wouldn't replace over time. I don't know, things like tooth enamel seem to be persistent and permanent until they're lost. Because if seemingly intuitively, if you could become like a paraplegic because a nerve went down, or if you can suffer like permanent nerve damage, permanent brain damage, because neurons were destroyed or damaged beyond functionality, then it would seem most plausible to me that they don't replace themselves, because it seems like those cells would get replaced at some point, unless the transaction is neuron for neuron, in which case if one is destroyed beyond the capacity to replace itself, that would create the sort of paraplegic situation. The paraplegic situation. Paraplegia.
Okay. So the only cells that are never replaced are the cerebral cortex neurons so far that we know. But every other cell is replaced 7 to 10 years, depending on which research you look at.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Which is to say that if it's like held up in court, right, for let's be honest, probably a scientifically illiterate jury, that in fact, not all of your cells were replaced, then you do maybe you do retain the identity of the murderer in that case, even if we accept what is intuitively nonsense, that that material composition is the only basis we're using for identity. But there are, it did bring to mind the example about material composition as the defense. It did bring to mind the example of the guy I heard of at one point, and I'm only pretty sure this was even real, but it doesn't matter. If it's a hypothetical, it's fine. Who could not recall, because it happened so very long ago, and because he was not, I don't know, I want to say he was like not neurotypical. That's not what I mean. I mean he had straight up forgotten the crime that he committed, that he had committed a crime at all. And it was argued, I think, that he was not the same person by virtue of the fact he did not remember being the other person. Like maybe, I think I've heard this described in other sort of philosophical frameworks, that memory is the thing that attaches you to your former material self. There's this like consistency of identity by virtue of the fact that it was all very gradual. But if you were to forget what you had done, or if you were to endure a substantial like personality change otherwise, such that you have lots of attributes now very suddenly that you didn't have before, then you are meaningfully a different person. And that can be used as a criminal defense, I think, much more plausibly. That the kind of thing a jury of ordinary people would see and say, "Oh, that is actually an interesting problem," as opposed to, you know, I'm physically and materially a different person. Nobody's going to buy that, because nobody actually buys that the ship of Theseus doesn't retain its identity some way, shape, or form, in some meaningful sense.
I don't know. I have a lot of experience being completely and totally blacked out, and it is my general experience that just because you don't remember being an asshole doesn't mean that you were somehow not. Like no, I'm a totally different person than I was, because I don't even remember doing that. That's like a foreign entity. Like no, that's you, and other people remember you being an asshole, and that becomes relevant.
Yeah, I guess like whether or not it matters for identity, I don't know. It's like I can view it again through a couple of different like frameworks. If you have the complete concept of me, then that complete concept includes the things, the way I am and the things I do when I'm blackout drunk, just as it includes the things I do and the way I am when I'm not. And if you have identity tied to like non-fungible traits, like non-fungible attributes that you can't change without changing the essence of the thing, then you might say that something like I don't know, just analytical reasoning is a non-fungible trait. That if I lose it, or that if it endures a change beyond like a intuitive recognizability, you might say that changes my identity, and that can change based on my chemical composition in this case. I don't know. With personality, it gets even weirder, but we can kind of approach it through either lens, and I don't really know which one to pick, you know.
I mean, I was just shitposting when I said that we should talk about murder more in Philosophy Club, but this has turned out to be a pretty fruitful endeavor. I should blurt out my random nonsense more often. William apparently is quite skilled at running with it. That truly is the mark of a good philosophy instructor.
In fairness, it's not just me. Yeah. So I don't know.
Also, Daniel, you did give away. Oh, sorry. What were you saying?
Nothing. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, Daniel, you also did give away a good tip on how to get away with murder, with like replacing the parts of a murder weapon. So, Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, quick PSA.
Shout out to all the murderers, I guess.
God.
Or not
No.
potential murderers. There.
Shout
Not
out
you want to already did it.
future murderers.
Which I
Shout
hope
out
none of
to
those are in
those-
this club.
Shout out to the those whose complete concepts include potentially, one day murdering somebody, whether or not we know that to be the case. Yeah, I just don't know. It's like, in my mind, and I don't want to presume that this is the case for everybody here, but in my mind, it's very much a conflict between this complete concepts idea and this this bundle idea with fungible and non-fungible traits. And I just don't know which to choose, because it seems like there are scenarios where our intuition would lead us more in the direction of complete concepts, where for example, you are responsible for the stuff you do while blackout drunk. And there are other scenarios where we would naturally intuit something more like the bundle scenario, the bundle framing. I said bundle too often. The framing with fungible and non-fungible attributes, because we might say that I am a different person from the person I was when I was 10, let's say. Not because my cells have changed up, but because my personality has radically shifted. I retain like some characteristics, but those don't seem to be enough characteristics to actually retain a meaningful sense of being the same person. And yet, under the sort of complete concepts description, I've always been the same person. It's just that at the time we didn't know that I would, exactly how I would change. And of course, the complete concepts, I don't know. I have no idea how either framing would cope with this cloning without killing scenario. I guess in a sense, it's not exactly surprising that, well, first of all, that a couple people with some knowledge of philosophy wouldn't be able to like get together and in a space of an hour solve the problem of the ship of Theseus. But it's also not surprising that like we wouldn't really have the sort of the intuition to grapple with cloning and actual ship of Theseus scenarios, because they're extremely rare in real life. So possibly like part of the solution here is just giving it lots of time, radically, allowing these scenarios to sometimes take place, and changing our frameworks and vocabulary to handle those scenarios. I'm just speculating, but I think in the same sense that we used to not have any idea how to investigate like the solar system, the cosmos, because we just didn't know what sort of thing it was. Over time, we invented those frameworks and that vocabulary to grapple with the ideas, and in the same breath, rather in the same sort of experiment, in the same project, we were learning substantive truths about the cosmos, about physics and how planets work and so forth. So this is my I don't know. This is my offering to what I think is going to be our sort of closing remarks. That I think we will have language and philosophy to deal with this going forward, contingent on the fact that we continue to have these discussions, to continue to think about the ship of Theseus and how it matters, how we think about these things. So yeah. I don't mean to close this out like finally. Do we have any other things to offer, remarks and comments to share?
I actually had a question about what you said before what you just said, William, about how Sorry.
I'm a different person now than I was at that time.
I mean, like, I can't remember what exactly you said this now that we're all being forgetful now.
Oh, was it to do with the conflict between like complete concepts as a framework and bundles of traits as a framework?
I believe so, but you were also mentioning how you yourself I mean, you're a different person from when you were 10 years old, and like,
Right.
you know, personality has changed. So, so I was just about to ask, so would you say the identity lies, where would you say the identity lies in then, like conscience, or now I'm sorry, I'm making things a little more complicated, bringing it back to the questions.
So if what we're getting at is like, where is the seat of identity for an individual person, and I suppose with the assumption that I'm carrying into this, which is that it can be different for a person and a ship, for example, a non-person thing. I guess, you know, a living creature, maybe if we describe a thing as having like sentience, maybe that could be a delineating factor. Whatever the case, there seems to be like some kind of seat of identity in an individual person, and I genuinely don't know. We've gone over like the scenario where obviously your cells, apparently mostly, but not all, change out. That might be transformative. If your continuity of consciousness is sort of broken somehow by losing a huge chunk of your memories. I don't know. Let's say an X-Men Origins Wolverine happens to you, and you just lose a bunch of memories all at once, but retain everything else. I just don't know. But I certainly feel very much like a different person. You know, I would, if you were to list my bundle of traits now, and list the bundle of traits I had, you know, 13 years ago. Wow. You would have basically comprehensively different lists. I mean, some like social identifiers have stayed the same, obviously. If we talk about race and ethnicity, I have all the same of those. I have the same, I don't know, problems with vision that I had back then, and those have been important the entire time. It seems like a non-fungible trait just because of how big an impact things like that have. But I don't really have a better answer than I intuitively think I'm a different person in most, like in the functional sense. Yeah. Although it is worth noting that also intuitively, so with the same sort of backing, with the same underpinnings, I do very much hold myself responsible for the crap I did when I was 10. It's not good. Yeah, I don't like consider those like someone else's sins, you know. And yet I would say I'm like functionally very different. And I think this is the case for everybody. I don't think my intuitions are terribly like uncommon here. Yeah, we seem to have.
This doesn't terribly relate to philosophical problems, but has nonetheless been fixating on my mind. You have said non-fungible traits several times throughout this meeting. That abbreviates to NFT, and then I'm like, okay, so like we're now talking about like shitty internet lingo, and that's where my mind goes. And I just wanted you to know that this is the child that you have agreed to do philosophy club with. This is the ADD brain that we all get to work with. It's like, oh, okay, apparently we're talking about the blockchain or whatever now.
Is that what that is? Yeah, I don't know. Also, to be clear, I mean to be saying non-fungible with an N in there. Non-fungible would seem to be the same idea represented more comedically than I am apt to, because I'm not fun. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, grappling with continuity of identity over time in a person is arguably harder than with the ship of Theseus, because we can't. It's interesting. to try and argue about it, because we can't really like settle on an answer that's, you know, self-consistent, but maybe not what we thought it would be, and just sort of accept it because it's the logically good one. We don't really feel like we have that option, because our intuitions are telling us, you know, we are responsible for the things we did as teenagers, even if we don't remember them. And yet our intuitions are also telling us that we are different people because we have changed so much over time. So we've made the problem harder. Well, good job, us.
And if that's not philosophy as well.
Exactly. Sorry, I don't mean. I think somebody else was trying to speak up a moment ago. I didn't mean to stomp on that.
No, I think it was just me with my NFT nonsense.
I still don't know what that is, but I guess it doesn't matter.
Spend more time on Twitter and you will. And by that I mean you will never ever know, because dear Lord in heaven, do not spend more time on Twitter. If you don't spend much time on Twitter already, don't join. It's terrible. No one's happy. Everyone's mental health when they leave the app or the website for a while gets massively better. That should be a hint to the rest of us.
What is Twitter? Because see, my experience, I'm actually gonna.
Mistake.
I actually want to put this out into the world. I use Twitter, but I use it in a very particular way that I think is maybe well, sometimes better than what is, I'm getting the impression, typical of people, because everybody hates Twitter except for me, and I think that's because I basically only use it to follow news outlets. Right? You know, I don't like to say I'm getting my information from Twitter, but I am getting a lot of like news feed from Twitter. And if I, you know, that's basically as far as my engagement with the platform goes. I rely on news outlets to post stuff, so it's sort of a repository of news information that granted is sort of not arranged in order of importance, which has bothered me. But yeah, my Twitter experience is, I think, radically different from most people's Twitter experience. And does that make it, you know, a different website? No. 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 Anyway.
You should follow Pavlov the Corgi. He's an adorable little corgi, and he says all sorts of smart-ass things on there. It's delightful. It's one of the only positive experiences that happen. Like, dog Twitter is fantastic. Any other kind of Twitter is just the worst, because it's just like, hey, you just get to hear everyone's terrible opinion about everything. And if you suggest, hey, maybe this thing isn't exactly like you said it is, you just get sworn at for hours on end. It's fun.
Yeah, there's another on the idea of like I'm protracting this meeting massively right now, but the we floated the idea earlier, I think, of like adding the ship of Theseus transforms into like Theseus's ship of Theseus and into the ship of Theseus type C or whatever. And so there's this branching of identities where we don't really change the thing, we don't really change the identity, we just add sort of qualifiers to the identity with the addition of new information. And that can be done with a surprising fluidity, right? For example, I have heard, although I don't think not really, I have heard that there is a thing called Black Twitter. And I won't speculate as to what that is, but it's reportedly very different from like Twitter. You know, there's a totally different sort of user experience on there, or at any rate, a different sort of demographic being represented, which was just endemic to the name. why I was assigned that name. There is so there's this whole other Twitter functionally, it seems, with this this qualifier that shares a lot in common, a lot of traits with Twitter, but that is not like that it wouldn't be functionally the same if you were to describe Twitter as if you were to describe Black Twitter, you know? And that gets at the same thing, like with my, just following news outlets experience, and also 2 different accounts calling themselves God, which is funny. It seems like our sense of, our intuitions about identity pretty quickly break down when we start to add these qualifiers. At least mine are breaking down right before my eyes. But those new sort of entities nevertheless sort of have their identities, and they have many traits in common with the original thing. It's just that I'm not, identity retention seems to be less important as we start to add qualifiers, storylines, sort of that sort of narrative of identity to the objects. So that's one way to start to grapple with it. Just don't be afraid to add qualifiers. Is the takeaway.
Like with your, like specifically with your Twitter example, I don't know. I think it, like in terms of, I don't know, to like ontologically examine Twitter, I think it sort of makes more sense to think of different subsects as like we would sort of like different branches of philosophy. It's like they all have their own sort of like idiosyncrasies and at points of emphasis and such, but it's all part of a bigger umbrella. Because I'm trying to think like what would be sort of just like baseline Twitter. And baseline Twitter, I don't think exists. It's just different subsects interacting with each other and fighting, basically.
Yeah, we can start to think about identity in its categorized form. I think is the thing with the umbrella terms like Twitter, and then and then I suppose subset terms like Black Twitter, or like my specific Twitter experience or someone else's, and we could do that. We could probably do that with like the ship of Theseus as well. We can think of it as everything in this picture, right, is the ship of Theseus. And in the same breath, that ship of Theseus is divided into 3. There's the original, and there's A, and then there's C. Wait, and there's B, and then there's C in this scenario. I suppose there's A too, because it's a hypothetical other ship of Theseus. Anyway, hard to believe it took us this long to get to the word ontology, but it happened. Anyway. Okay, we are now at 8:34. I don't mean to keep us here any longer than we immediately want to be. Do we have any other remarks to share with the recording, just so we have them?
Can my last word be the word but? Because I want my last word to be the word but.
So it is. Okay. With that, I think is the conclusion of this one of the Philosophy Club meeting, officially, at CSUS. Thanks for those of you who are here, and thanks to anybody who may be watching this video at a later time. I don't know who you are, but I may do at a later time, and I'll be a different person then. Thank you all. We'll see you again possibly this Saturday, but we didn't talk about optional meetings. Possibly this Saturday, 10 a.m. or next time, May 6th with Professor Kyle Swan of Sac State. And with that, see you later. Oh, wait.